Let's welcome our next speaker, Mr. Mario Molina from the Climate Reality Project. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, and thank you, Chip, for having me. We have about 15 minutes. My role is to try and sum up the climate crisis impacts and solutions in the next 15 minutes. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I am the International Director for the Climate Reality Project. In that role, what I do is I serve our 10 country offices in advocacy programs to implement their NDCs domestically. Because this is a global problem, we like to start our presentations with this image. It is called the Blue Marble, and it was taken by the Apollo 12 mission on December 7th, 1972. It was the first such image of the Earth in history, and it's the most reproduced photograph of the Earth ever. The Blue Marble really prompts us to ask 3 questions. 1, must we change? 2, can we change? 3, will we change? Well, to answer the first question, must we change? There are many people, including President Cheeto, who don't think that the human activities can actually have an influence on the atmosphere and the composition of the atmosphere. However, we know from looking at images like this one from the space station that the atmosphere is a very, very thin layer compared to the vast sky that we see when we look up above us. It's equivalent really to the paint of varnish around a soccer ball. And we are dumping about 100 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions into that atmosphere every day. So the science is clear. Changes in land use and agriculture, but specifically changes in the amount of fossil fuels that we consume for electricity and transport are actually heating up the atmosphere. Over the last 40 years, we have seen a dramatic increase in carbon dioxide concentrations across the atmosphere. Most of these coming from fossil fuel burning. It's no coincidence that we've also seen a significant departure from average global surface temperatures. 2016 was actually the hottest year on record, and it was the 3rd year to break all heat records since recorded history began in 1880. And 2017 is actually well on its way to be the 4th year to break all of those records in history. This type of heat is having extreme effects across all sectors of society. What we see here is Private Cecil Dean in California passing out from heat exhaustion during a military training exercise. In this image, we see an elderly woman being carried out by the Boston police during the 2005 heat wave. Climate change will impact the elderly and the poor the most. Where is all this heat going? Well, we've been talking a lot about oceans. I'm not going to repeat what Carl said yesterday. We know that the oceans are doing us a great service by actually absorbing about 95% of that heat. However, as the ocean surface temperatures warm and land temperatures warm, we have increased water vapor in the lower part of the atmosphere. That precipitation, all of that water has to actually land somewhere, and it's landing in the form of more intense and frequent extreme weather events, mostly over land. This image gives us a sense of what the new normal looks like when we talk about superstorms. This is a supercharged storm cell in Glasswell, Montana, and just for a sense of scale, you can see the barn right there. So what we're seeing is that these precipitation events don't only dump water from right above where the rainfall event is happening, they can actually draw moisture from basins that are about 2,000 square miles, having really, really devastating effects, as we saw last year in the Colorado spring floods. We already talked a little bit about flooding. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But what we do know is that we could see a 40% increase in extreme precipitation events over the next 40 years if emissions continue the way they are. Scientists used to be wary of saying, hey, we can't actually tie this particular storm event to climate change. But now we know that the relationship is systemic, not linear. All storm events are tied to climate change because the underlying environment in which they happen has changed. But that very same extra heat that's evaporating water out of the ocean is also drawing moisture up from the soils, causing droughts to be longer and more intense. For those of us that live in the West and depend on the Colorado River, the 7 states and the city of Las Vegas that depend on the Colorado River for our water supply, that's dire news, obviously. We have seen water supplies from the largest U.S. reservoir of water, of water dropped by 70% in 2016, where the levels actually dropped by almost 1,000 feet, threatening the supply for millions of people. Also, hotter years have more fires. Those of us that live out here in the West know what the last year's fire season was. We now see a fire season that has been extended by 3 months on average since the 1970s, and the area burnt on an average fire season is 6-fold that which it was in the 1970s. That's a real threat to infrastructure and also to homes. Our own home was within half a mile of the Cold Springs fire when it swept through the Netherlands suburbs in 2016. What I realized after the fire is that we were actually severely underinsured for such an event. And it's very likely that most of us are actually severely underinsured for these events. Why? Well, in 2015 alone, there were 1,000 extreme weather events recorded at a total cost of about $100 billion. Less than 30% of that cost was actually insured, were insured assets. In addition to extreme weather events, I'm not going to get into polar ice cap melting. I think we've covered it enough. But it is important to realize that we are losing about 300 billion tons of ice from the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, which, as we discussed, and Dr. Schlapp talked about it earlier, we had him in Miami, is actually threatening billions of dollars in cities in the US right now, and poses a threat of trillions of dollars of the global economy across major cities worldwide by 2070. This is actually causing a lot of the insurance companies, the reinsurers, the people that insure the insurers to say, hey, we're really worried about this because large parts of the world may actually become uninsurable by the end of the century. So when we hear on Fox News that taking action on climate change would hurt the economy, it's straight up lie. We are already paying the cost of carbon. We are already paying for the cost of the economy in these ways and in the threats to capital assets, health risks, and infrastructure. The #1 threat to the global economy, Bloomberg View has said. So, must we change? The answer is, duh, yes. Can we change? Well, we have the solutions at hand. And after all, we are at the American Renewable Energy Day. So let's talk a little bit about renewables and what solutions we do have at hand. Back in 2000, the International Energy Agency made a projection that worldwide wind capacity would reach 30 gigawatts by 2010. They were off by a factor of 7. That capacity was exceeded in 2010, and then in 2016, the world had installed 489 gigawatts of wind capacity. In the US alone, wind energy capacity has risen dramatically in the last 5 years as costs have gone down and market penetration has increased. And you've installed 82 gigawatts of wind power. Why? Well, the cost of the technology has decreased, especially as the market has grown dramatically. We can see this, and this is a worldwide trend. Globally, wind could actually power this whole supply of worldwide electricity 40 times over. And the wind industry actually employs 80,000 people, with the wind turbine service technician actually forecasted to be the fastest growing occupation in the United States between now and 2024, even faster growing than the healthcare sector or the technology sector. What about solar? Well, solar energy progress, the solar energy market 2002 projection said, hey, we may be growing at 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. That forecast was actually exceeded by 17 times. And in 2016, we exceeded that forecast by 75 times. We now are installing 76 gigawatts of solar power per year, and 2017 is expected to install up to another 79 gigawatts. Why? Well, in the US alone, solar actually contributed to 39% of all new generating capacity installed in the country. Why? Again, the cost of photovoltaics has dropped dramatically. It has actually dropped over 100% in the last 40 years, and 80% has dropped in only the last 7 years. The solar industry employs 360,000 people, 370,000 people. That's almost 2.5 times the number of jobs in the coal industry currently in the United States. And in Colorado, it's also a massive employer. Enough solar energy reaches Earth every hour to fill the whole world's needs for an entire year. The question, well, but what happens when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow? Well, that question is becoming moot. Basically, as storage technology increases, we now expect to have about 2.1 gigawatts of storage capacity by 2020, which we have exceeded that mark as expected. The projection was by 2016. That also means a six-fold increase in the market for a total net worth of the market of approximately $4 billion. Why? For the same reason. The cost of lithium-ion batteries has dropped almost as dramatically as the cost of photovoltaics has. And I have a pretty funny Elon Musk story in Europe that I don't have the time to tell you, so catch me after the break, about coming in peace to the utilities. But honestly, what we're seeing is we are actually seeing a full transformation of the utility business model and the global energy market happening right now. Investment in new generating capacity actually exceeded investment in fossil fuel generation for the 5th year in a row in 2016 for a total of $380 billion invested last year. So can we change? Yes, absolutely. We can do this. We can absolutely do this. Will we do this? Well, in 2015, all the nations of the world, with the exception of Nicaragua, because they didn't think the Paris Agreement was strong enough, and Syria, because they're dealing with some other stuff, agreed to curb greenhouse gas emissions by the end of the century to achieve net zero. The cornerstone of that agreement is actually the 4 pillars that Climate Reality works on internationally, and it's having long-term goals, having a transparent process, agreeing to a review cycle, and nationally determined contributions. It's a very strong framework, the strongest framework we had ever come up with yet. Unfortunately, the very small vision of our small-handed president has withdrawn the United States from the Paris Agreement. And so not only is that a threat to the US economy because of the economic forces that we just talked about, but it also cedes global leadership to the EU and China, which on the very same day, Thursday, June 1st, that the US withdrew from the Paris Agreement, were meeting to actually agree on how they're going to move forward and take leadership on this issue. So make no mistake, this administration has successfully galvanized the 67% of Americans who believe that climate change is real, human caused, and needs to be addressed at both federal and local governments. US cities, as we talked yesterday, I'm not going to go into it, but businesses, states, and US cities are already taking leadership on the issue, but we can't leave it up to them. This is no time for retweets, shares, and reposts, and likes. We will actually have to join millions of people and show up, watch legislation that's moving through Congress, call our Congress people, ask our networks to call Congress in order to join those and use our voice to speak truth to power. Because really, we need to do this like our world depends on it. Because in fact, it actually does. And I would be remiss if I didn't actually do a plug-in right now for the Boss's new movie coming out next week, June 28th. Please go see it. And there's an accompanying book, Truth to Power. Thank you so very much.